behind the desk. And here we are.
Welcome to Behind the Desk 2018.
Hello. Oh my God, 2018.
It's our first episode
So
back in the new
exciting.
year.
I'm Luke.
I'm Mel.
And this is Behind the Desk. We're so happy to be back. Hopefully our stats are rocking. We've got more listeners. I am in New Orleans.
You are in New Orleans. I'm in New York City.
Right. Sure. And yeah, we're so
very
excited.
Exciting today. We have very, very exciting news. Luke, are you going to do an audition rundown?
I just realized I'm going to have to.
Okay. Well, maybe you should cue that up.
I've got it going. Let's talk about our guest real quick.
Okay. So this is very exciting. I'm behind the desk because we have our very first guest. New year, new podcast. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Oscar?
Yeah, well, first, just thank you for having me. Super excited. But yeah, my name is Oscar. I just moved to New York, I guess officially 6-ish months ago.
Yes.
Back in 2017, the summer.
Way back in 2017.
Way back in 2017. And I moved from Texas and to, explore the New York life. But I'm also a teacher,
Yes.
a theater teacher at that. And so I moved up here for a gig, as they call it.
You're behind the desk. We keep it professional.
Right, keep it, try to stay with the lingo and try to. So I got a gig, a teaching job up here. And yeah, so I've been teaching. This is now completing my 4th year teaching, which is bizarre to think.
Oh my goodness.
4 years teaching.
Congratulations.
Thank you. All babies, 5 to 10-year-olds.
Babies.
And introduce them to the magic that is theater.
They don't even know their dreams yet.
Yeah. And I sometimes look at them and I just weep and just think about
what are their lives to be?
Yeah. And the disappointments to come. But we all try to uplift them and just show them, teach them the magic.
Yes.
Yeah.
That we are still living because we're still doing this.
And Oscar and I have been friends for a long time.
It's not about you, Luke.
Well, I just want to provide a... Okay, you know what?
Oscar and I
I've
have
had
been
enough
friends
of your shit!
for a whole year.
Tired of your shit!
Do the dumb rundown.
I'm not gonna do the audition rundown because the internet's being dumb. So, I'm gonna hit y'all right now when I record this later. Okay guys, I am so flippin' excited because I'm here in New Orleans and I've got a new mic. And I'm gonna do this audition rundown for y'all. Strap in, it's actually audition season, so things are crazy. Okay, starting on Monday, January 8th. Starting at 9:30, you've got Olney Theater Center. It's their NYC EPA for their season. Next at 9:30 as well, it's 1,000 Nights in One Day EPA. That's going to be Actors Equity. I'm sorry, Olney, by the way, is also going to be Actors Equity. Next, what we got? Soul Doctor NYC EPA. That's going to be at NOLA. It's starting at 10 a.m. Looks like they're only looking for 3 roles, but it's actors, singer, musicians. I don't know. Should check that out. Next, the Muni is having their season auditions EPA at Ripley Greer, 528th Ave, starting at 10 a.m. If I'm correct, they've got more calls coming up in the week, too, besides just on Monday, the 8th. But anyway, moving on. Something Rotten. They have their NYC EPA on Monday as well at 10 a.m. It's going to be at Pearl 500 on the 12th floor. Yeah. Next, we got Grace or the Art of Climbing. Looks like it's only by appointments. It's for Art House Productions. It's going to be the 8th at 12. Yeah, looks like they're only seeing a couple of things. Next. Ooh, okay, now we flip to the 9th, Tuesday, January 9th. This is still only Theater Center for their season. Looks like they're doing male dancers in the morning at 9:30. I'm going to safely say that the females are probably in the afternoon. That's dancers. It's for the entire season for only. That's Tuesday, January 9th at Ripley Greer, 528th Ave. Next, still on Tuesday, January 9th, Pennsylvania Shakespeare Festival 2018. Looks like their season as well. It's going to be starting at 9:30 a.m. at Actors Equity, 16th floor. Next, we got Stage Life, again, NYC EPA. This is on Tuesday, January 9th, still starting at 9:30 a.m. That's at Actors Equity, 16th floor. Next, we're back to Soul Doctor again. This is going to be the NYC ECC Female Singer Call, starting at 10 a.m. I think they might have... Yeah, male singers will be in the afternoon. So starting off female, Soul Doctor NYC ECC. It's going to be on the 9th at NOLA Studios. Next. Still on the 9th, we got Bump. I don't know what that is. Ensemble Studio Theater in NYC EPA. Looks like it's going to be at the Ensemble Studio Theater, which is 549 West 52nd Street. Those of you who didn't know, like me, starting at 10 a.m. Working through it. Next, Wednesday. Switch to Wednesday, y'all. January 10th, starting at 9:30 a.m. We've got Stage Life again. That's an EPA. It's going to be Actors Equity, 16th floor. We're almost done. Next, still on Wednesday, January 10th at 9:30 a.m., The Great Leap. That's an EPA. Looks like it's at the Atlantic Theater Administrative Offices and Studios, which is 76 9th Avenue. Again, Atlantic Theater Administration Offices and Studios, 76 9th Avenue. That's for The Great Leap NYC EPA, starting at 9:30 a.m. on the 10th. Tantrum Theater, their season. It's going to be January 10th still, 9:30 a.m. Actors Equity, 16th floor. And last but not least, Rogers and Hammerstein's The King and I, NYC ECC. Male dancers are going to be in the morning on Thursday, January 11th. Thursday, January 11th, 10:30 a.m. It's going to be at Pearl 500. The females will be in the afternoon, it looks like. Cool. That wraps it up. There's nothing going on Friday, guys. Peace. Back to the unsuspecting Luke and Mel, signing off from NOLA here. Bye.
And that was a rundown.
And that was your audition rundown for the
There
week.
you have it.
I'm so glad I could record that later. Cool.
Don't tell them about the podcast magic.
Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. What are we doing next, Mel?
Well, I think we might do our very, very famous audition horror stories!
Yeah!
Guest edition!
Audition Horror Stories live with Oscar Franco here in the studio. Oscar, so tell us about an audition horror story. And so you said you want to do it from a casting
Yeah, so you might say
perspective.
he's behind the desk.
Indeed,
I wish I had like one of those sounding boards to go like wah, 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 wah.
Tell us about it, Oscar.
Yeah, so over the course of my career in theater, I have been a stage manager, sometimes director, but mainly stage manager. So I'm the one that has been calling the people in and taking the notes down and just watching them audition. I guess this deals more around the topic of what happens when you have someone audition for you that is just not like right. It's just not, that just shouldn't, they really shouldn't be a performer. Like, it's just not working. And it made me think of, the Simon Cowell type of like experiences when he would he would kind of lay it,
some dreams.
and lay it all out there. And so this is one of those times when we had a wonderful woman come in to audition for one of the shows that I was stage managing and actually assistant directing as well. So it was kind of had a lot to go with that. And she came to the audition. She was very respectful. She had everything with her. And she ended up doing a monologue from Mary Poppins. which
Classic stage play.
which was and she gave us her audition stuff. She gave us her form. She gave us her picture and everything, and we were just excited that this that she was gonna audition for us. She says, "Excuse me for a sec," and she walks to the side after she had already introduced herself and done her like slate or whatever. She pulls out her bag, like a big old bag, and she brings it back into the chair.
Oh my gosh.
And she pulls out a Mary Poppins like style hat. She pulls out an umbrella.
Oh my God.
She pulls
with props.
out the entire set, basically. And
she does the London skyline.
Yeah, she's got like a fly rail system with
got like
her,
a chimney sweep
her own
just like
harness.
Yeah.
She's like being lifted in the air with her own crew.
And she has her puppet bird next to her and everything, and just ready to go.
She's revived Dick Van Dyke. He's alive, but you know. Back to his prime.
So she brings all these things, right? And we're all looking at each other as like trying to be as discreetly as possible, trying to give us the what's going on look, but also like, okay, we're professionals and we're gonna see what she has. You know, we believe in giving everybody a fair chance, fair opportunities. And she begins her monologue with an accent, with the umbrella, with a very she was very like posing for every little thing as if it was like a photo shoot, that every moment was choreographed. She was prepared, let me tell you. She was prepared. She knew exactly what she was gonna do, the timing with the prop, you know, and it was for me one of the strangest experiences of. And I, in that moment, thought, okay, how should I respond to this? I'm going to be honest, was holding back, and maybe this might not be the best introduction of me onto the podcast, but I was like about to just like burst out laughing, but I contained myself because I just couldn't do it.
That's why I'm not a casting director.
Yeah, Mel. Hashtag Mel doesn't hold back.
And then to sort of, and that our director was very professional. He thanked her for doing the monologue. He asked her questions, asked her more about her acting experience, pulled questions from her resume that he asked her. Was very professional, and she ended up. This, by the way, I should have maybe mentioned, but this was we were auditioning for a reading of a new play, and. He loved her energy, and we loved her enthusiasm and how prepared she was. She wasn't quite right for the roles we were looking for, but she ended up reading our stage directions for that show.
Booked and blessed. I love it.
I love it too. I just like it's so hard to. Okay.
Oh my gosh.
Holding back a little bit.
I'm so happy your director gave her.
No, that is amazing.
Oh man.
It
proves to you.
Wow.
What we say all the time: be interesting in an audition, and people will remember you.
Hashtag be bold.
Yeah.
Hashtag booked and blessed. Mary Poppins. Way to go.
Boy.
And she's ready. Anytime you need a Mary Poppins, you call that lady.
If I don't have a story like that at some point in my audition career, I don't think I've done it right. Like, that's how I feel. Like, I don't know. I'm like, if I just...
Also, like, bless your casting team.
Good Lord. I would have lost it. I would.
Because I enjoy...
I almost did, but...
Were you crying?
From
holding back? It was his emotional response to her performance.
Okay. Oh, for heaven's sake. Okay. Okay, so we have our good friend Oscar in the studio with us, as you know.
Yay.
Just heard his wonderful story.
Yeah.
So I'm going to share a story that I think Oscar has a lot of opinions on.
Sure.
And we are happy to hear them and share them with all of you.
Yeah.
So about a year ago, now, wow, it's been a year, I was invited in to audition for In the Heights at a theater. And I went in based off my headshot submission, and I went in and I auditioned for them, and I got a call back for the role of Daniela in the Heights. And I told Luke about this because we were just discussing, what we'd done that day and whatnot. And I told Luke about it, and he said, Mel, you cannot play that role. Like, that won't be great for you. How would you feel playing that role? Like, with our current climate and industry and all the things that are happening in our industry, how would you feel playing a role in the Heights if they were to offer you to? Well, I didn't get offered the role after the callback, so I mean, no harm, no foul.
It was a very heated conversation.
It was a very heated conversation between Luke and I.
And it was also very early on in our
relationship.
Platonic, more or less.
Well, so Oscar, I want you to weigh in on this.
Yeah. Can you remind me where this took place? Or
it was in New York. I'm not going to name the theater, but it was in New York.
Just like the general
it was
area
in, New York. I don't know.
Yeah.
How else to say New York?
Nueva York.
There you go.
Yeah, say it in Spanish because I'm fluent in it, but I'm not going to speak in Spanish. Anyways.
Well, that would
shout out to
a whole new set of listeners to us.
That's true. Well, I guess if any fellow Mexican Americans are listening out there, you're not alone. Here I am.
You're not alone.
So yeah, no, it's an interesting scenario, or real life scenario, and this has not been the only case that I've heard in different through different blogs or different groups about.
It's a big hot button issue.
Yeah, about different groups and whose responsibility it is. Sort of to either tackle this on or to quote unquote stand up for, what having someone that's not necessarily of that same culture, race, being represented on stage. So I've definitely heard a lot of different arguments from both sides. And it's just fascinating to, I think, really, really think about not just whose responsibility it is, but also at the end of the day, like, actors have to make money in a certain way, right? Or you have to make money. You're going out for these gigs and you're offered something because the director has, or the casting, or whoever's in charge of putting this vision together, they have a vision and you happen to fit that, and that's sort of what you as actors are there to do. On the other side of that, it's the idea of, okay, if you're offered something that you don't necessarily agree with, but you're offered that, is it your responsibility to stand up for that, and how, as an actor?
I think a lot of it, Luke had the opinion, of course, that I shouldn't do it, and I wasn't flat out no. I'm going to be honest. I wasn't a flat out no. I said, this casting team had seen me that way. I went in, I sang, I did the callback just like everyone else. They were the ones that were asking me to be there. So that's kind of where I fell into it. So you say I was offered this role. Do you think that it is my responsibility to think about that and to think about it, who I am as a white female and that role and the cultural resonance that role has? Do you think it would be my responsibility to think about it and then reject it? Or do you think I should have a conversation with the casting team? What would your path be? So
ultimately, I think, in thinking a lot about this conversation, I guess I wouldn't ever tell someone to not do something, or maybe I would offer my opinion, but ultimately it's like your choice, right? If you're gonna take it, you're gonna take it, and I'm not gonna harass you for it or something, but I do think that there's a responsibility that you're also taking on that I think you should be, or not you specifically, but in this case I guess it is you.
Yeah.
You, in the general sense of whoever takes those kinds of roles, I think you're taking on an additional responsibility on making sure that if you're saying, I'm willing to take this role that's being offered, please, I would say as a person of color, that there's a big responsibility in making sure that you question everything that you're being asked to do, and come at it from a place of understanding, a place to try to be as transparent about the fact that you are not of this culture, if that sort of makes sense. So if I
try to absorb as much as possible and come at it from a place of truth instead of whatever ideals I have about the character
Yeah,
and the
and I
culture and all
think
that kind of thing.
And I think, I mean, reaching out. I think it's always important to reach out to people that, uh, who reflect these characters that you're, or this character that you're gonna portray, and having that conversation with them as well. Like, hey, I've been asked to do this role. I'm gonna take it for whatever reason, but I understand that I'm not of this particular culture or whatnot, so I'm reaching out because I don't want to do this alone, and I feel like I shouldn't do this and just assume or try to figure it out on my own. I'm reaching out to people who represent this, and if there's somebody in the production team, I think it's important to reach out to them. And if there isn't, I think it's also your responsibility to reach out and say, hey, I've noticed that our entire like production team is not of this culture. Um, and maybe in taking that role or before taking that role, saying I would love to take this role, but I, hope that we have somebody of that culture represented in the artistic team that's making decisions as well on how this is going to turn out.
Can I
So,
ask a question about
yeah.
what about like the consequences of accepting the role and then understanding how the audience is going to react,
Yeah.
whether those people are of color or are not? But
It's
like
kind
your
of
like your
the
kid,
controversy that happened with the Evita, like
Oh,
people
Yes.
people were outraged about it, as they should be, but they were very disgruntled about it, and we don't know the background that exactly went into that. So do you think just like a hard no, it should not happen, or do you think that it can happen if you have a search for truth and a search for cultural accuracy behind it?
Can I say that, like, with your kid, like you talked about in that story, did we talk about that on this episode? Okay, we'll edit this out. Never mind. I'm going to talk about a different story that is parallel
Well,
to
I
this
want him to tell
idea.
the story
Give me just 1 second,
about
because
his mentor.
this relates to the audience thing really quick. I saw a show in Chicago. Basically, it was like a whole bunch of, like, there's monologues, some other stuff, and a lot of it had to do with people giving examples from their own personal life. That was just something that really affected them. Well, this actor who's Asian American accepted an understudy role. He was accepted a role in an ensemble show that was for kids, but also accepted the position of being understudy of a lead who was black, who also then spoke and had to say things that were, I am black, and like I am doing like things that have to do with the cultural perspective of it. Well, he ended up having to go on and for an audience of kids, and while he was doing that part and said a line that had to do with being black, one of the little kids shouted out, "You ain't black," and he was like, and I never accepted anything like that ever again, and have been in an awkward position ever since then for having accepted it. So I'm curious as to like what your thoughts are, Oscar, on the consequences of possibility, like especially with kids like that. That matters. I don't know. That's my little story. Sorry.
Yeah, there's a few things that come to mind, and there's a few different ways or different stories that come to mind. So I'll try to be brief so I can get a few of these out. One thing that comes to mind is I recently went to or saw a performance of monologues at Carnegie Hall.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then this event was put on by this organization that brings in the arts and specifically performance and theater to youth in Africa. I think it was specifically South Africa, and try to use theater and the arts to help the youth and young people cope with trauma in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And so they help write these monologues and help to do all this amazing work. And then this organization paired with Carnegie Hall to bring sort of these stories back to us, back here to New York, and to really like the United States in a larger context. They had professional playwrights. They had I'm blanking on the playwrights, but they had professional playwrights that had worked with these monologues and helped reshape them to be able to present them as part of this evening. It's a one-night event thing. And then they brought in professional actors, both high profile actors
Huge
in TV.
names. Oh my god.
Yeah,
Huge names.
they brought them in to share these monologues, and some of these professional actors were white, and yet they were performing monologues that were written by youth of color. And so that in itself was a little bit jarring for me, but there was also a whole conversation that I had with a friend that I went with that about what it means to use maybe your own quote unquote privilege or your own body to help elevate stories that may not have otherwise been shared. So in this context, this event brought in hundreds and hundreds of people and hundreds of really dollars and money for this organization that's doing this great work because of these high profile professional actors. So that's sort of like, you know, they use their high profile actorness, which, you know, helped brought in a lot of money for this great cause. So in thinking about that, I wonder about what it is to take on a role maybe with the thought behind of using your own awareness and using no not awareness using your own God, I lost my train of thought on this.
I think I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
I think people will get what you're trying to get at. But like in the situation like what I was talking about, the kid doesn't know, like in the audience, that may be the case. So like how do we handle
Well, it's
that?
the same thing I was saying. Like,
Right.
I mean, we're just told so much that a gig's a gig, and it's not a blame game per se, but it's like a gig's a gig. They saw me this way. I'm taking the gig. Do I take the gig? If I take the gig, am I honoring it? Can I do anything to honor this, or is it just like you did something wrong immediately? And I think that's my question for you.
Yeah.
I mean, would it change your perspective if I had played that role of me personally? Or do you think something of those actors who take a gig because it's a gig and they were given it?
I think there's so much. I think there's so many other layers that I hope that people like think about it, and I hope that people and audiences ask, okay, well, I wonder why that was, rather than just immediately assigning blame. Which
in an industry where it's based so we've talked about this, Luke, so much about looks. You know, you walk in, you have 30 seconds, you give them what you got. And in that 30 seconds, you know, if they see what they want, what do we do? Do you know, like, that's, I think, the big conundrum here. That is, I don't think anyone comes from a place of malice or a place of, like, I want to take this from you. I hope not. But it is, what do you do in that situation? And that's what I was frustrated with, because you weren't seeing how frustrating that would have been for me. That choice would have been a very difficult choice. I thankfully didn't have to make it. Thankfully, I don't know. But I didn't have to make it.
For sure.
But how would you have felt, how do you feel about people having to make that choice?
It's tough. There's, I guess I can only really answer it with like stories that I've experienced. One of my mentors from college, she works a lot with youth, and she works a lot with high schools and sort of building connections with high school theater students and the theater students at the college that they work at. And one year, she decided to do an all really Latino based night of different Latino stories with the high school that they've been in partnership for years up to that point. The students at that high school in the high school theater program were predominantly white. And when I first heard of that she was doing that, I was taken aback, and I was like, whoa, like, why is this happening? Like, this, my initial reaction, and maybe that's what I would speak to, how I would feel if I saw you up on stage taking that role. My initial reaction is, I'm taken aback. Well, I'm gonna learn what's going on, why I need to know more about why this is happening. And my initial reaction to be slightly defensive about it. When I start to speak to my mentor about why these choices were happening, why she was making these choices, she mentioned that, you know, just because we just because we don't have the quote unquote people or the actors to do a certain show, does that mean that we don't ever do that show? If high school programs across the country, predominantly have white student actors, does that mean that no one should ever perform Hairspray? No one should ever perform
West Side Story.
West Side Story?
Yeah.
It's a huge one.
Just because they don't have the student actors to do that. She ended up doing that as a way to say, hey, we want to tell these stories because we think that these stories are important regardless of our own race, regardless of our own cultural background. We think these are important. And hopefully in that also saying or inviting really other students that may have never thought to be in theater to bring them on board.
So she was giving voice to the work versus voice to the
cultures that were
Yes.
already in the room.
Yes.
So she was acknowledging we have this culture and this background in the room. What stories, what voice are we missing?
And do you think those high school students, those high school students learned more through doing works like that, even though they personally weren't from that culture? Do you hope, I guess?
I mean, I don't know.
each of
I
them
don't know the
individually.
specifics. I don't know the specifics about it, but I do know that some of the students had to learn Spanish. Some of the students had to learn a different style of dance because I saw it, by the way. I went to go see the showcase. They learned a specific style of dance. They were learning about different cultural things that I feel like they wouldn't have otherwise maybe have access to.
And do you think they honored the work?
I think so.
Yeah.
I felt that way. I didn't feel like it was to me it didn't come off as a joke or as we're doing this thing and very stereotypical.
As an educator, would you look down this road? I mean, you have kids that are much younger than this, but
Yeah.
would you consider doing these types of things with children just to start the conversation to make sure that everyone knows everything?
Can I add on to this that kind of goes on top of that question? Because there are also high schools that will do the productions like Hairspray and then change words and get it to be something different. To where it's not just black and white, it's, these other colors, when that is specifically, those are the colors that we're talking about in that show. Just like how, there's that production of Rent where they didn't have AIDS anymore, they had diabetes. I feel like there's issue there as well, but are they wrong still for, trying to do the thing? I don't know.
So are you saying, if we censor it, are we losing the learning?
Right, are we, if you censor it just because they're all white, kids in this high school, or,
Are we losing the lesson?
Right, even though you're we're doing the
chance
thing.
to learn and
Right,
expand
we're still doing the thing, and, it's supposed to be a chance to
What
learn.
do
It's
you
well, then
think?
you're censoring it, though. But so is that okay?
I mean, I feel like that also goes into another conversation about the author's intent and the importance of that. I don't think anything should be changed from a play. I don't think words should be shifted around, changed around
Right.
to. They should be presented as such because
Right.
if you're choosing that production, hopefully you're doing it because of the message. So I don't think
Right.
people should be changing it regardless of the level of professionalism in the sense of a professional production versus a student or in a school setting. I don't think changing it should be something that should happen.
Great, so now answering her question, would you for sure go down that route if you were presented with the opportunity?
Your kids are young, though.
Well, and I will also say, and I will also share that my kids and the years that I've been teaching have all mostly, 98, probably 95% of them have been of color. So I'm coming at it from the other side of I'm trying to find
Right.
all these these stories of people of color and culture to
Which is
share
the
that.
whole other side.
Yeah,
of
that's the
issues,
whole side
that
of-
they're not even
Right,
represented
but
enough.
if you were presented with the opportunity, if you had been in that teacher's shoes, is this something that you think you would want to pursue?
I think so.
Yeah.
And I think because my background itself as Mexican American, I not that suddenly qualifies me for other things, but I
Right.
feel like I have somewhat of, to me, being that Mexican American has always put me in the mind frame of always noticing those kinds of things, just because that's just what I grew up with, always noticing when I'm the only person of color in a room, and so that's helped me be more attuned to those things, which I think goes a little bit back to your story, Mel, of I think all of these kinds of tricky situations should always be followed by a discussion in some capacity. So in a high school setting, if you end up doing
Yes.
in a high school setting, there's always room for a talkback at the end, especially if you're doing Hairspray with not people of color, especially if you're doing West Side Story with white students, like having those conversations and intentionally reaching out to communities of color, whether that's within the other student population in your school or somebody in the community, to bring them in and have these sort of conversations.
I think it's very interesting. If you do theater in high school, elementary school, all those things, sometimes you don't have the conversation. It's just you're cast in those shows.
Right.
And you're not looking at it and then you get thrown into the professional world and suddenly it's such a big deal. And I think a lot of people go through that because if you played, Anita in West Side Story and then you're like, wait a second, I already played this role. I danced her role. I know her lines. I can sing her song. In a professional setting, you're not supposed to go in for that role. I think that's a really hard thing for people to kind of move past because they've already done the role, but they never get cast in the professional world.
Right.
But they accept it. Does that make sense? I'm just saying the same words.
For sure.
I think that's an interesting paradox that we find ourselves in because I play like you were an ensemble and In the Heights, and you've said I would never do that professionally.
Right.
Because of who I am, but you had the opportunity to do it. So you think that experience should still be happening? You should still get the experience in a learning setting, even if it's never going to become a professional setting?
I would also say I wouldn't be comfortable accepting that position in the professional world, given that the rest of the cast does not reflect, what the show is meant to represent, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I just think it's interesting that we get these opportunities to explore when we are in,
College or
a learning setting,
right,
and then an educational setting, and then in the professional, it's like, well, you had your chance, kind of. It's not going to happen while you're here. Not to say to take away those opportunities from anybody else.
Sure.
Just it's interesting that's even something that we have to come across.
That we get more leniency to the idea of doing it in an educational setting.
I mean, coming from an educational background, what do you think, Oscar? I feel like I'm literally
this is an interview. It's like I'm being interviewed.
Yeah, let's get through this, and we got to start wrapping it up.
Yeah. I think ultimately, and maybe there's a lot of thoughts going through my brain, so maybe I don't quite answer this directly. But I think for me, the bottom line in terms of this conversation, from an educator's point of view, there should always be a conversation with students. There should always be a conversations with families and within the community that you're inviting to see this production from the beginning, and have it be a proactive rather than a reactive conversation when suddenly a family member is upset about something, or someone in the community is upset about it, saying, you know what, we are going to do this production because I believe this is important to have, and inviting families, inviting the students and their families at the beginning before auditions even happen to say, this is the season that we want to do. These are the shows, and I understand that these our students that in the program don't necessarily reflect these characters per se, but I think this is an important show. Let's have a conversation about how we can all support the message of the show. And how we can honor the show and honor this story with the bodies that we have in this space. To not do so.
Thank you. I was like, I want to make sure we grab that.
Proactive,
Hashtag
not
be
reactive.
proactive, not reactive.
Yeah.
I like that.
And it can be taken also in a professional setting. Why wouldn't that, those kinds of conversations happen there too?
Yeah, I mean, that's why I think we thought this conversation was very important to have, Oscar.
Thank you.
And
We're
it's also
definitely going to have you back.
Yeah, I was like, this is also probably not the
the
only
tip of the
episode
iceberg.
that we do on this topic, and we might revisit other topics as well in other episodes, but this one I know for sure. I think we all feel strongly about revisiting.
I don't think the conversation is ending.
Yeah.
It's Probably not even after we stop recording. Because Oscar and I are chatterboxes.
As it will. Okay, all right. Give me the Oscar, Mel. Give me your last thoughts on this topic, and then we're gonna wrap it up.
I would say what I mentioned earlier. What can be a quotable hashtag moment. I'm kidding.
You did it.
You did it.
He
But
did the hashtag on behind the desk.
but yeah, be proactive about these conversations, and instead of being reactive and waiting to only address it if it comes up. And I think being proactive is always
And
the
have
best
the
choice.
conversation.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
have the conversations for
And
sure.
I'm going to end with, we were told to question everything as actors. We question everything, the who, what, where, when, why. Question it as a person, too, before you make any kind of decision.
Mm-hmm.
Question everything that's happening. And don't be afraid to start a conversation. This conversation budded from...
Hashtag start a conversation.
Yes.
There we go.
This conversation started from 3 friends chatting, and
There you go.
to see where it goes.
Great.
Thank you,
We're gonna wrap it
Oscar.
up. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Oscar.
Thank
Franco,
you all for having
guesting.
me.
Teaching us and growing with us.
We love everybody.
Hashtagging
We're
with
all
us.
learning. We're all learning.
Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, lukewarmmelon at gmail.com. Send us all your thoughts. We really want to hear thoughts on this. Oh my God, so that we can also include those thoughts in
Include you in the conversation.
in another episode though too. We want to be able to like revisit some of the thoughts that you guys send us. So either stop us, we'll record you saying something, email us. Just give us your thoughts or opinions if you see us in person. Yeah, let's wrap it up behind
Thank
the desk.
you.
Love you guys.
Thank you, Oscar.
Bear.